Fyodor Dostoevsky was a very complicated person. Many people believe that his difficult life helped to make him a literary genius. Dostoevsky was born in 1821 in Moscow. His childhood was very unhappy. His father, a doctor, was bad-tempered and violent. He believed in very strict discipline for his children. Fyodor's mother was a sweet and gentle woman. She was the only person who could control his father. When she died in 1837, Fyodor's father became even worse. He lost all control and was angry all the time. He left his job at the hospital and went to live on the family's land in the country. But he was so cruel to his workers that they eventually murdered him. Fyodor's father wanted his son to work in medicine, so Fyodor went to college in St. Petersburg. When he was 21, he joined the army. He worked hard, and in his free time, he liked to go out with his friends. Unfortunately, Fyodor spent his money foolishly and lost a lot of his money gambling. He earned a good salary, but he was always in debt. Dostoevsky hated the army and left after only 2 years. He wanted to be a writer. He wrote a novel and sent it to some publishers, but the publishers wanted him to make some big changes. He refused. So he borrowed money and published the novel himself in 1846. The novel was called Poor Folk. It was a great success, and suddenly Dostoevsky was famous. Everyone wanted to meet this talented writer. He loved all the attention, but he loved it too much. He became very conceited. He was often cruel to his friends and admirers. After a while, he had no friends. Dostoevsky wanted new friends, so he joined a secret political group. The people in the group disagreed with some laws of the government. They believed in freedom of speech. They also wanted the farm workers, who were called serfs, to be free. At that time, wealthy Russians owned the serfs who worked on their land. As a boy, Dostoevsky spent the summer at his family's home in the country, and he had become friends with the serfs. He believed very strongly that they should have rights. Dostoevsky almost died for these beliefs. On April 23, 1849, the police arrested Dostoevsky and other members of the political group. All of them were sentenced to death. They stayed in prison for 8 months. On December 22nd, the prisoners were taken to a public place in St. Petersburg, the capital of Russia. It was extremely cold, but the men wore only their shirts. An officer read the men's names. After each name, he said, "Sentenced to be shot." There was a line of coffins nearby. Someone tied up the first 3 men and put bags over their heads. The soldiers pointed their guns. Dostoevsky watched in horror. There was no hope for him now. Suddenly, an officer rode into the square waving a white flag. He announced that Tsar Nicholas I, the leader of Russia, had changed his mind. The prisoners were now sentenced to 4 years of hard labor in the prison camp of Siberia. Dostoevsky was very relieved, but this experience tortured him. He wrote about many of these feelings in later books. For the next 4 years, Dostoevsky worked as a prisoner in Siberia. The conditions were very difficult. Siberia was one of the coldest places in the world. Many prisoners suffered terribly, and many died. After Dostoevsky left the prison camp, he had to stay in Siberia for several more years. In 1857, he married a widow with a 9-year-old son. He also joined the army and began to write The House of the Dead, a novel about his horrible experiences in the prison camp. 2 years later, Dostoevsky was allowed to return to St. Petersburg. He finished writing his book, and it was eventually published. A few years later, his wife became ill and returned to Siberia. Dostoevsky needed to raise money for his family, so he started to gamble again. Unfortunately, he only got more into debt. In 1864, Dostoevsky's wife, his brother, and a close friend died. He was terribly depressed and now had more financial problems. He took responsibility for caring for his brother's family and paying his brother's large debts. Dostoevsky moved to Western Europe during the 1860s. A publisher there offered him a lot of money to write another novel, but he had to do it quickly to get the money. So he hired an assistant, Anna Snitkina, to help him. About 6 months later, he married her. Anna was 25 years younger than Dostoevsky. Over the years, they had 4 children and a good life together. Anna took care of all of Dostoevsky's business. She worked with the publishers and with the people he owed money. She helped him to have a happier and easier life. During the last 20 years of his life, Dostoevsky wrote his 4 most important novels: Crime and Punishment, The Idiot, The Possessed, and The Brothers Karamazov. All of them are great masterpieces. He worked very hard. He usually worked late into the night, then slept until the early hours of the morning. He also worked quickly. Sometimes he worked on 2 books at a time, one in the morning, another in the afternoon. Dostoevsky was never a healthy man. He had very bad eyesight, which made it hard for him to work. He also had a serious brain disease called epilepsy. People with epilepsy shake violently and lose consciousness. Another illness caused him to lose consciousness and remain very still for a long time, as if he were dead. Because of this, Dostoevsky had a terrible fear of being buried alive. Dostoevsky died at age 59 after years of illness. 30,000 people watched his coffin pass through the streets of St. Petersburg. It was the largest funeral procession in Russian history. When he died, he was Russia's greatest writer. Now, many believe he is one of the greatest writers in the world.